basically my history of where I learned what was going on in Virgin Islands politics, the Virgin Islands business community, came from my experience at St. Thomas Graphics.
I
And
mean, yes, sorry.
to tell the truth, um, one of the biggest political geniuses that this island had was Judy Pitzl. She had a way of seeing through certain things, or being able to phrase things and communicate things, and that's probably one of the reasons why most politicians, most of the successful politicians, were coming to St. Thomas Graphics to get their printing done, their brochures done, and everything else. They would sit down there with her for hours into the night, going over their brochures and everything else. She'd be making little editorial changes, saying, no, 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 no. Think about what was happening in Bavoni these past couple of years. Do you really want to take that stance on this issue? What if we soften it? All these other sort of things. And it's like, I used to be in there up into the middle of the night too, because there was a lot of overtime work. All this stuff was being done by hand. Okay, think of, you have one little printer on your desk right now and a mouse and go click. We had to bring it in, typeset stuff into the machine. We were still interacting between typewriter and lead type. We still had some lead type in the building, where those were the little tiny characters that you set with tweezers and everything else. And then it would go to a dark room where we had to make a negative, then make a positive, sometimes then back to negative again while we did our retouching. And then we took it out, masked it up. You saw the mask and everything else, the yellow sheets over those dark plastic negative films. And then that would go on an aluminum sheet. We had aluminum that was a thin, thin, thin aluminum sheet. We had aluminum that was bare and aluminum that was pre-coated from the factory. The aluminum that was bare, we would have to mix up the chemical ourselves and everything else that adheres to it. And then we'd put it in what was called an arc lamp. And this was two carbon arcs that met together under 220 volts of current. I have no idea how many amps, but it would create one little tiny spot of light brighter than the sun. And that would actually burn an image into the aluminum plate. The machinery there that was necessary to use for these processes was some very, to get them to the island, these were very heavy and bulky pieces of equipment. So these, the majority of equipment in that shop was World War II era equipment. There were 4 presses in there, 1 cooling machine, a big bomb folder that could fold things like cardboard and everything else at several hundred packages or sheets a minute. It was a full service shop. And so, yeah, all of that, which you do on your machine, you pull up your clip art and everything else out of your little program. 2 minutes later, you're running off your wedding invites. Yes, that's what it took. And when we told you, okay, it's going to take 2 weeks to print, we meant it was going to take 2 weeks to print. And okay, Supreme Printing is basically the only one that's still around. That's Stanford Joseph. Okay, and St. Thomas Graphics had such a relationship with those other print shops because Dick went to school to be an engineer. Okay, and we're on St. Thomas in the middle of the sea. And almost everyone's equipment, okay, was 40s, 50s, 60s, and even some older than that, because Otley had equipment going back to beginning of the 20th century. Okay, this is Earl B. Otley. Yeah, I'd already said his full name before, so it's, yeah, he had stuff going back to then. Melchior had other presses, and basically between Otley, Melchior, Jackson, most of the local print shops on the island were people who trained and learned under those 3 giants. Yes, and Dick had no problem going out, stopping whatever he was doing and going out to these people's print shops and repairing their machines for them, doing what he could. Sometimes we needed to fabricate parts and everything else, and all of that stuff had to be done on island because Dick had a rule. Okay, if you have to leave the island, you lose points. You don't bring anything on the island that you either can't get parts for or that you can't manufacture yourself. The only true 4-color press that we had on that was on island was at the Daily News, that big giant web press that they had, which was committed mostly to newspapers and newsprint. Although, yeah, they could run other type of papers, but you'd have to special order a big giant roll that was like 4 feet high, and what are you going to do with all the rest of that paper? So what St. Thomas Graphics had, we had, there was a big one color Harris press that would run a 22-inch wide sheet, a 17 by 22-inch wide sheet to get an impression like that. So that would give you 8 pages out of your big 1117 book, plus
Okay.
the big posters you used to see for the campaigns.
Yes.
Now, what used to happen was, remember, you have your color separations that you saw that in some of the examples of the work process that are in the 4 different colors. Okay, we run those colors through on the press, and so the sheet would go through 4 times, which
Wow.
also meant that our pressmen had to be incredibly skilled
I,
because the
I,
dots that we were printing at were 100 and were 133rd of an inch. 1.3, okay, it was a, yeah, 0.133 dots.
oh,
Okay, like 72 DPI is what 72 dots per inch. Sorry, yeah, how am I wording it? 72 dots per inch is what you normally see on a newspaper.
okay.
Okay, and so we were doing by hand with our naked eye 133 dots per inch. Digital started fading in toward the 90s, and it wasn't even the 2000s, but the digital cameras were one of the first things that started the business going down because the business was mostly Main Street, the tourist sector, hotels, and all that type of stuff. So they're the ones who actually had the money to start buying the equipment to start photographing their own stock and running off on the new colors, Xeroxes and whatnot that started coming out in the late 90s.
Right.
And that was basically the center of St. Thomas Graphics printing base, with the exception of the funeral books and dinner dance booklets that was being done for civic organizations. And with Bruce Potter, yes.
Yes.
He would come into St. Thomas Graphics because they had the contract to do the assessments all around the island to determine best practical uses, they determined the area of particular concerns, areas for preservation and restoration, what areas should be in the territorial park, and everything else. Extensive work done on just about every ecosystem that you knew of on St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix. And Bruce Potter was bringing them in, and of course, his secretary had everything all nice and typed up and all this type of stuff. But now our work begins because now we gotta retype it all. But it's a huge camera. Okay, it's bigger than a desk.
Wow.
Okay, and yeah, we would type something. We would type something, and it's like, yeah, we had a minimum font size of something like 6-point type, and then the maximum font that we had was like a 14-point. Okay, that we could type with. So now you have somebody who needs a headline, and
Yes.
it's like, okay, and we need it done fast because we also had other methods of doing type, like we had rub off type and everything else, and sometimes we'd even do the type by hand, calligraphy.
Wow. Wow.
But yeah. So what would happen now is you take this image, the type, put it in the camera, and pull the big. Okay, people would look at the big. The accordion, the bellows cameras. They had a big bellows, so you'd stretch the whole thing apart depending on how big or small, whether you want to enlarge or reduce. And so, yeah, we could take that little tiny letter and essentially make it as big as you want. If you want as tall as a 10-story building, we could do that by basically taking a picture of sections of the letter enlarged and printing them out on paper and stacking them up. As a matter of fact, that's where the first big giant political poster came from. There was a giant poster that was like 16 feet tall by 8 foot wide. That was of Celestino White.
Is that
Yeah, I did it right there in that camera with film. Just kept enlarging and piecing together, and then put it down on 4 sheets of plyboard, 4x8 plyboard.
And where did you display that?
We had an original display somewhere in Sugar Estate, and the Daily News complained about it, so he moved it and put it at the entrance of the Daily News, the road going into the Daily News, and that's where it stayed for the remainder of the campaign.